Garrosh versus the Thunder King!
I am the slayer of kings and gods. Hellscream's eyes are upon you. I cannot do that.
I have been chosen by Amatis herself!
Out of their house. We actually no longer think it's Mom that's sort of come out of the seance. We think we unlocked a different spirit, an evil spirit, and now that evil spirit is haunting our house. And so Frank, at this point, he's like, guys, that's not what's going on here. You really need to stop. Like, these tapping sounds are not real. They're in your head or they're normal. And so Frank and his daughters really began to fight over this because the girls, they know they're hearing sounds and Frank's like, I'm not. And so they're really starting to fight over it. The girls, they're getting more and more frightened just being in their house, in particular at night when these sounds would typically start. And so fast forward about a week after the seance, and now the girls really are so scared to be in their house because of this tapping, which they believe is now this evil spirit in their house. They're finding all sorts of excuses to just stay out of their house. Like when dad's at work late, they're trying to stay at their friend's house and not be home because it was too frightening. And Frank, he's sort of at his wit's end with what to do with his girls, because now this thing that's going on in the house, this delusion as he believed it was, that his girls were suffering from, it was really disruptive and unhealthy. And he began telling his girls, like, if you can't stop with this whole tapping delusion, you're gonna have to go to grief counseling. Like, this is too much. And so, again, fast forward about a week here, and that's what's going on in the Bowen household. And on this particular day, the girls, Tina and Karen, they didn't have a place to go that night. They didn't have a friend who was available. And so they're home at their house alone. Frank's out for the night doing a late night shift. And the girls, they're in their kitchen just kind of hanging out. They're pretty anxious here. And they start to hear tapping sounds coming from the basement. Now, by this point, the tapping sounds were so common that just hearing the tapping sounds was not like this horribly frightening thing. It was just sort of this very unsettling thing where nobody knew what they were. And again, the girls think it's something evil. But on this night, that the girls are alone, Dad's gone, Tina, the older of the two, she says to Karen, like, Dad doesn't believe us. He does not believe that there's tapping sounds in the house. And so we, right now, need to go down in the basement and investigate, because if we don't, no one's ever going to look into this. Like, nobody believes us. And Karen is horrified at the idea, Karen's the 9-year-old, of going down into the basement, to go see what this tapping is, but she doesn't want to be away from her sister, and so she's like, okay. And so Tina gets a knife from the kitchen, she goes to the door to the basement, Karen follows right behind her, and Tina, she opens up the door, and the two girls begin going down the steps. And once they get to the bottom of the steps and they're in the basement, it's just this kind of blank slate down there. There's a washing machine and a dryer, there's some boxes, but it's just sort of a dank, sort of open, nothing cellar down there. And the girls, when they got down there, they're looking for the origin of this tapping sound. And on some level, they expected to find something that was making these sounds because they've been hearing these sounds. For them, it's not a delusion. Like, every time they hear these sounds, they are real to them. Just because their dad doesn't hear it does not mean it's not real to them. And if you look at the beginning, when they first started hearing the sounds, they thought it was their mom. And they never really fully investigated. They maybe didn't want to find out that, perhaps the tapping sound was, a washing machine or something, because that would destroy the illusion that it was their mom. So they never fully investigated then, and then the next few days after that, when it sort of transitioned and became a scary thing, the girls also never really investigated because it was scary now. They didn't want to know what was making this tapping sound. And so now, here we are a week into this, and they've gone down into the basement where they've heard the tapping sounds, and they're like prepared to see something that is making this sound because it's real for them. Like, maybe it's a raccoon or some animal that's gotten into their house, but there has to be something because they hear these sounds. But now they're looking around this basement and there's nothing. There's nothing that could possibly be making this sound. And the girls are horrified. And so after being down there only for a couple of minutes, Tina, who's got the kitchen knife, she's like, Karen, let's get out of here. Like, this isn't right. Let's get out of here. And so the girls turn around and they begin going back up the steps. And as they do, they notice something on the stairway wall that they didn't see on the way down. Written in red on the wall are the words, "I'm in your closet, come find me." When the girls see that, they are horrified. And they sprint up the stairs, they bolt out of their house, they go to their neighbor's house, start banging on the neighbor's door. The neighbor comes to the door and he's like, "What's going on?" And the girls are like, "Oh my God, we had this seance, we've been hearing tapping in the walls, and now somebody's written on the walls, we don't know what's going on." And the neighbor is so confused, really doesn't understand what's happening. And he's like, "Look, girls, just come into my house, you're safe here, we'll wait for your dad to come home, he'll know what to do." And so the girls, they're hysterical. They go into the neighbor's house, they shut the door, and they wait. And then a little bit later, Frank Bowen, their dad, he comes home. The neighbor immediately flags him down and calls him over. And he's like, "Look, here's what happened. Your girls came over. They said, something about writing on the walls. I don't know." And Frank's like, "Okay, all right." And he tells his girls, like, "Look, stay here. You're safe here. I'll go check the house and make sure nobody's in there." Frank, at this point, in no way suspects that there's anything, evil or bad in his house. He thinks this is just a continuation of this delusion the girls are sort of acting out. And so Frank, alone, goes back to his house. He opens up the door, he goes inside, he searches the house, and he looks everywhere, but there's nobody in the house. He does find the writing in the stairwell going down to the basement. It does say, "I'm in your closet, come find me," but it's written in ketchup. And so after, again, searching the whole house and finding nothing other than this writing, Frank goes back over to the neighbor's house and he talks to his girls, and he's not mad at them. In some ways, he feels like all of this is basically his fault. Like, he should have handled this more aggressively at the beginning, and he let it get to this point. And so he tells his girls, like, "Look, I know that you wrote those words on the wall. I know that all of this is sort of a delusion that's playing out that started with, something good. You thought it was Mom. But now it's become something that isn't good. It's disruptive. You've convinced yourself the house is haunted, and I'm very worried that this is a product of grief. Like, grief is leading you to do these things, and it needs to stop. And so starting tomorrow, you're gonna go into grief counseling. We need professional help here to make sure you girls are taken care of. I should have done this from the beginning, so we're gonna make that happen right now." Now, the girls knew they didn't write that on the wall. They're not making the tapping sounds. But they also knew their dad 100% didn't believe them, like zero, and it was not going to change. And on some level, like, they think maybe there's truth to what he's saying. Maybe they are so grief-stricken that they've convinced themselves of things that are not real. And so in this sort of vulnerable moment where the girls are totally upset about what they've seen and what they've heard, they just tell their dad, like, "Fine, like, whatever, we'll go to grief counseling." And so sure enough, the next day, the girls would start grief counseling, and right away, all the tapping in the house, all the writing on the walls, all that stuff stopped. Like, peace returned to the Bowen household, at least at first.
As you may already know, I recently was on tour. Me and my team spent 4 weeks traveling in a bus around the country, telling stories live to thousands of people. It was totally incredible and surreal. But I've got to say, the best part of the whole experience was just getting to interact with you all in person, fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. And also, pretty much everybody turned out in flannel. It was like a sea of thousands of people rocking the flannel. Because basically at this point, the official uniform of the strange, dark, and mysterious is the flannel. And guess what? I have a surprise for you that has to do with flannel just in time for the holidays. I am so excited to share that our brand new official Mr. Ballin flannel is now for sale on shopmrballin.com. But hurry, because quantity is limited. This is a first come, first served situation. But it's not just a flannel. We actually have a whole new collection for the holiday season. And they include things like the Mr. Ballin Christmas sweater. We also have a hat, we have a hoodie, there's a blanket, like a flannel blanket. There's ornaments, there's stickers, there's pins, and much more. But don't wait too long to buy this stuff, because this is a holiday drop, which means if you want it in time for the holidays, you gotta order now. So again, head on over to shopmrballin.com to pick up your official Mr. Ballin flannel, along with all the other great stuff we're dropping for the holiday season. I can't wait to see some of you guys rocking the flannel the next time I go on tour. Happy holidays, everybody. Okay, back to the story.
Fast forward 3 weeks to December 8th, 1986. So this is 3 weeks after the girls began their therapy, and in those 3 weeks, the Bowen household is totally calm. There's no more tapping, nothing, everything is fine. But on December 8th, Frank, along with his 2 girls, Tina and Karen, and their friend, Kathleen, they had been out for the evening, maybe getting ice cream or going out to eat or whatever, and they come back to the Bowen household. And when they do, it's nighttime, so it's dark outside, and Frank, he goes up to the porch, he goes to the front door, and as he's about to open up the door, he looks through one of the windows of his house, and he sees there are several lights on in the house that he didn't remember leaving on before they left. And so he just thinks, like, that's weird. Like, I could have sworn I turned those lights off. He's kind of looking back at the girls right behind him, sort of wondering if maybe they left the lights on, but he's like, no, that's weird. So he unlocks the front door, he swings the door open, and immediately he sees this scene inside of his house that makes no sense. The TV is on, a radio is on, and furniture in the first floor of the house where he's looking has clearly been moved. Not dramatically, but things have been moved around on the first floor. Like if you live somewhere, you know where things go. Things are off. And Frank, like he's seeing this, and he's sort of looking back at Tina and Karen, and he's like, did they do this? Are we back to this whole delusion? You gotta remember that even though it's been 3 weeks now of peace in the Bowen household, Frank is all too aware of how insane it was right before then. You know, with the girls, you know, writing on the wall, at least according to him, and thinking there was an evil spirit in their house, and, you know, he's thinking, is this them? Like, somehow did they do this? This feels sort of like a continuation of that. He's looking at the girls, but he's thinking to himself, like, they've been with me. We've been out of the house. How could they do this? But again, Frank is sort of caught. You know, on the one hand, he knows this could be his girls, but he's also thinking that's not possible. And so in that mind state of sort of being caught between these two opposing ideas, Frank, instead of backing out of the house and calling the police like anybody else would do, he instead just begins like walking into the house, sort of nonchalant, like not really sure how to react. And he begins this sort of half-cocked search through the house. And the whole time, Tina, Karen, and Kathleen, they see what's going on, and the 2 daughters, they're terrified. I mean, they're all too aware of all the tapping and the writing on the walls. They're thinking, this is real, it's happening again. And so they're tucked up right behind Frank, who again, Frank is like in shock. He's just like wandering through the house, like, what's going on here? Turns the TV off, he's walking around, turns the radio off, he's moving furniture back around, and he can't believe it. And so he does this weird, like again, half-invested search through the first floor. He doesn't